I thought today it could be cool to talk about how to fly with a bass, just because it can be kind of intimidating if you haven't done it before. There's a couple schools of thought. The main question is if you're going to check your bass or if you're going to carry on your bass. My strong preference is to carry on the bass. The reason is I feel like it's way more convenient if you have a gig bag for when you get to where you're going. It's way easier to jump on the subway or to get into a taxi or to get around town with a gig bag instead of a big road case. I love mono gig bags. I'm not endorsed by them at all. I really do think they're making the best gig bag out there. They're waterproof. They're really well padded. I've never had a problem. I actually used a Reunion Blues gig bag for years and years. And then the day I got a mono bag, it totally changed everything for me. It's more comfortable. You don't like knock the bass on the door frame when you're walking around through doors. It's just like, they're really good. I'm playing a short scale. I'm playing with a Mustang, so I'm actually able to fit my Mustang in a guitar case, which, you know, you're barely hugging the corner here. Like the headstock is like right on the edge here, but you can close it. And the reason that is super helpful for when you're flying is you have a better shot of getting it in the overhead bins. So let's talk real quick about carrying on a bass. So if you carry on a bass, you might have to gate check. And if you don't know what that means, that's when you get to the front of the line, you're about to go on the plane, or maybe you already got on the plane and you realize there's not enough room inside the main part of the plane to keep your bass. And what gate checking is when they'll take your bass and they'll actually put it down in the hole. It's like you hand them your bass as you walk onto the plane, and then when you're walking off the plane, they're handing it back to you. I've never had any problems with that. It is a little scary, and I'd say maybe it happens like 20% of the time. Usually you can get your bass in an overhead bin or in the coat rack. There's a little part in the plane where if you get there early enough, you could ask the attendant, hey, can I put my instrument in the coat rack? And usually if you're cool, they'll work with you. They'll get your bass safely in there. On smaller planes, you can't always fit a full scale bass in the overhead bin, especially if it's like if it's a domestic flight on a smaller aircraft, you might not be able to get your bass in the overhead bin. So that's an advantage of having the short scale. But if you have a full scale bass, it's okay. There's still a good shot. You're going to get it in the overhead bin or in the coat rack if you get there early. And if you have to gate check it, it's going to be okay. The other option, like I said, is to check your bass, to check it in a road case. You can do that as well, but once you get to the gig, it's going to be a little bit less convenient. Now, what about pedals? Well, there's a couple options there. I guess it has to do with how many check bags you have. But for this tour, I did 2 check bags. So I have all my clothes in a check bag, and then I put my pedal board in this Pelican case. If you're not familiar with Pelican cases, they're indestructible. You can throw them like in the water, and supposedly they're waterproof. Like you could run them over with a car. They're really sturdy. So if you're putting something checked, I like doing it in a Pelican case. And I just put my whole mono gig bag inside of there. Or if you had a smaller board, you could put it in something like the Tick. If you're not familiar with the Tick, this is a smaller container that you can actually attach to the gig bag, which is super convenient. I'm actually just putting all my personal items in here, like my wallet and my phone and my headphones and like all my stuff for the plane, because when I'm walking on the plane, I can just take this thing off. I can put it down underneath my feet. I have everything I need for the flight. I put this in the overhead bin and I have everything here. And then for this gig, I have all my pedals in the Pelican case. And I'm really happy I did it that way. It's been really convenient. And I'll show you some of the stuff I'm bringing along. All right, so I've got my pedal board here. Underneath, I have duplicates of all my cables, because here's the thing. If something goes wrong at sound check, it's like 5 p.m. You can't get to a music store. If you don't have what you need, you're either going to have to borrow it from somebody, or you're going to have to figure out a way to bypass something. So I like to have duplicates of everything. So I have duplicate instrument cables. I have duplicate power supply, patch cables. I've got some foam in here. If you aren't hip to foam on bass, that's a super cool sound. We'll talk about that in another video. But I've got extra power supply, extra patch cables. I've got, basically, if something goes wrong on this board, I've got a backup. Also, when I fly, I like to unplug a lot of my patch cables because this kind of looks sketchy to TSA. They're like, oh, this is a bunch of buttons and lights and cables, so I unplug them. So if they're going to cut something, in my head, I'm like, they're less likely to cut it if it's not all connected. It's a little less suspicious. And then when I get to the gig, I'll just plug everything back in. I also take pictures of everything because if somebody opens this up and they're messing with knobs, I can get all my settings back. That does happen. This is all to just ensure that when I get to the gig, this thing isn't ripped apart and I can put it back together. And if something is not working, I have duplicates. I also have strings here. And if you notice, these are not in a box. These are used strings. Why is that? Because I like to have broken in bass strings on the gig. I like the way that sounds. It's a more smooth, warm sound that I like. Now let's say I broke a string. It does happen for bass players. It doesn't happen a lot, but it definitely happens. If I broke a string on the gig and I had to replace it, anytime I'd play that string, any note on that string is going to sound different. It's going to sound brighter. It's not going to be consistent. So what I like to do is I like to break in strings and have duplicates of broken in strings so that if I have to switch on the fly, it's going to sound consistent. I've also got my in-ears here. So I've got a Pelican case inside of a Pelican case. A few tips on flying. I like to do a gig bag instead of checked. I like mono bags. I like using the tick for personal items and checking the pedals. Or if you needed to, you could do a small board in the tick and you could take your bass, and then maybe like if it's just like an overnight gig, you could take a backpack with some of your personal stuff. You wouldn't even have to check a bag. So a lot of this has to do with how many bags are you going to check, how long is the gig. I kind of treat every situation different, but I think this is a good way to do it for this particular gig where I have all my tone, I have extras of everything, I can travel light, and I'm comfortable on the plane, and I can have a gig bag when I get there. So those are some tips on how I like to fly. But here's a question. How do you like to do it? Do you like to do carry-on instead of check bag? Do you think there's something that I'd be doing differently or better? I'm always open to learning. This is all about us learning and teaching each other. So let me know what you think. What kind of things are you taking when you fly to gigs? If you haven't checked it out yet, I do have a bass course. So if you're trying to get to the next level with your playing, I have a link to that in the description. So check that out. And I'll see you on the next video.